The first thing you notice in a fire isn't the heat, it's the sound. A hungry, cracking sound, like the world is chewing up your life and spitting out embers. It's a predatory sound. And it was coming from my hallway. I was jolted from a dead sleep. The kind of sleep you only get when you've been staring at a computer screen for 14 hours straight, trying to make a cartoon blob look convincingly sad about dropping its ice cream. One second, I was dreaming of misplaced keyframes. The next, a shrill, relentless scream was tearing through my apartment. The smoke alarm. My cat, Pixel, a ball of black fur with a personality somewhere between a disgruntled old man and a fluffy demon, was already a step ahead of me. He was crouched by the bedroom door, hissing at it, his ears flat against his skull. Okay, I hear you, I mumbled, swinging my legs out of bed. The air was thick. Not just sleepy stuffy, but acrid and sharp, like burning plastic. That's when I saw the smoke. A greasy gray tendril slithering under the door. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed me in the chest. This wasn't a burnt toast situation. My brain, usually a chaotic mess of deadlines and witty comebacks I think of 3 hours too late, snapped into a laser-focused survival mode. I snatched my laptop bag from my desk, my entire portfolio, my livelihood, my whole damn career in a 5-pound rectangle. I scooped up the still hissing Pixel, tucked him under my arm like a furry, ungrateful football, and bolted for the fire escape. The hallway was a nightmare, a roiling vortex of orange and black, heat radiating in waves that made the air shimmer. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my apartment door shut behind me, fumbled with the rusty latch on my window, and scrambled out into the cold night air. Below, the street was a flashing kaleidoscope of red and blue. Firefighters were swarming the building, shouting orders, unspooling hoses that looked like giant white pythons. I clambered down the cold iron steps of the fire escape, my bare feet protesting with every step, Pixel's claws digging into my side. I joined the huddled mass of my neighbors on the opposite sidewalk, a grim little pajama party of the displaced. There was Mrs. Diaz, her face a mask of wrinkled terror, clutching a framed photo to her chest. Ben and Chloe were there, their newborn, Leo, blessedly asleep in Chloe's arms, oblivious to the chaos. We watched as the firefighters aimed their cannons at the third floor, my floor. The blaze seemed fiercest right around my apartment. I sank onto the curb, pulling a coarse wool blanket someone had draped over my shoulders tighter around me. My home, my sanctuary, the one place in New York City that felt like mine, was being consumed. And all I could think about was the crisp, sterile letter that had been slipped under my door exactly 1 week ago. 1 week earlier. The letter was printed on paper so thick and creamy it felt arrogant. It had the kind of weight that suggested it was used to delivering bad news without apology. Dear Tenant, it began, without so much as a friendly hello. Please be advised that as of October 1st, under the new ownership of Sterling Properties, your monthly rental fee for apartment 3B at the Althea will be adjusted to reflect current market rates. Your new monthly rent will be $4,800. I read the sentence 3 times. My current rent, a relic of a bygone rent-controlled era I'd inherited from the previous tenant, was $2,400. They were doubling it, with 30 days' notice. There was a second paragraph about planned capital improvements and enhancing the living experience, but that was just corporate fluff wrapped around a steel-toed boot. This wasn't a rent hike. It was an eviction notice with a price tag. By noon, the building's text thread was on fire. I called an emergency tenants meeting in the lobby that evening. The lobby of the Althea wasn't grand, but it was ours. It had a slightly off-kilter tile floor and a smell of old wood and Mrs. Diaz's cooking. He can't do this, can he? Chloe asked, bouncing a fussy Leo on her hip. There have to be laws. There are, I said, holding up a printout from the tenants' rights website. But the loopholes are big enough to drive a bulldozer through. He's claiming capital improvements, which gives him leverage. Mrs. Diaz, who had lived in her apartment since the moon landing, wrung her hands. I cannot pay this. My pension. It is impossible. Where will I go? Her question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. We were artists, musicians, young families, retirees. The exact kind of people who made this neighborhood vibrant, and the exact kind of people who get priced out of it first. Just then, the elevator doors whispered open and out stepped the man himself. Marcus Sterling. He was exactly as you'd picture him. Tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, shoes so shiny they reflected our miserable faces, and a smile that didn't touch his cold, calculating eyes. An impromptu community gathering? He said, his voice smooth as polished marble. How charming. I stepped forward. I had been elected spokesperson, mostly because my resting face is a permanent scowl. Mr. Sterling, we need to talk about these rent increases. They're not just unreasonable, they're impossible for most of us. He gave a theatrical sigh as if we were inconveniencing him with our desire to, have a place to live. Miss Vance, is it? I've reviewed the building's files. The Althea has been operating at a loss for years. These adjustments are not personal, they are simple economics. Economics? Ben, a lanky bassist from 4C, scoffed. You're kicking an 80-year-old woman out of her home of 4 decades. How do you factor that into your spreadsheet? Sterling's smile tightened. I understand this is an emotional transition for some of you, but you must understand my position. This isn't a charity, Miss Vance. It's a business. And frankly, this building is an underperforming asset. My investors expect a return. He looked around at our worn-out lobby, at the faces of his tenants, and all he saw was a number in the red. He didn't see the place where Chloe and Ben brought their baby home. He didn't see the apartment where Mrs. Diaz raised her children. He didn't see my little studio, the one place where the chaos in my head could be turned into art. He just saw an asset that needed to be liquidated. You have 30 days to consider your options, he said, his tone dripping with finality. Then he walked out the door, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and shattered hope in his wake. Present day. Ma'am, Miss Vance? The voice snapped me back to the present. A burly fire marshal with a kind face and tired eyes was kneeling in front of me. Is there anyone else in your apartment? He asked. No, I croaked, my throat raw. Just me and my cat. I gestured to the traumatized lump of fur still hiding in my lap. The marshal nodded, making a note on a clipboard. The fire seems to have started in your unit, near the main living room outlet. He paused, looking me straight in the eye. We see this sometimes. Disgruntled tenants, eviction notices, things happen. My blood ran cold. The implication was a slap in the face. He thought I might have done this, me, a person whose only act of rebellion was giving my characters sassy dialogue. No, I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of emotion. Not fear, but fury. No, I did not do this. He just gave me a long, hard look, a look that said, I'll be the judge of that. I stared back at the burning building, at the smoke pouring from the blackened maw that used to be my window. My home was gone. My possessions were gone. And now, thanks to Marcus Sterling, I wasn't just a victim, I was a suspect. The next few weeks were a masterclass in hitting rock bottom. I was a professional refugee, couch surfing at my friend Maya's place. Maya was a saint, but her apartment was the size of a walk-in closet, and her chihuahua, Bruiser, had a personal vendetta against Pixel. My days were spent in a miserable cycle, hours on the phone with Sterling's insurance company, where I was treated like a criminal trying to pull a fast one, followed by calls with my animation clients, trying to sound professional and stable, while Bruiser yapped murderously in the background. Lara, we love your work, one of my main clients, a guy from a hip tech startup, said over Zoom. But our launch is in 2 months. Do you have a firm timeline for getting back up to speed? I looked around Maya's living room, which was also my bedroom and office. My desk was a stack of coffee table books. Absolutely, I lied, forcing a confident smile. Just a minor logistical hiccup. Everything is under control. Everything was, in fact, very much not under control. My big Cintiq tablet, the expensive heart of my operation, was now a melted puddle of plastic and glass. My savings were hemorrhaging, paying for takeout and laundromats and a storage unit for the few smoke-damaged things I'd managed to salvage. I was losing work. I was losing hope. The tenants of the Althea were in a similar state of freefall. Sterling, ever the opportunist, used the fire as a pretext to declare the entire 3rd floor uninhabitable. He sent formal eviction notices to everyone on the floor, citing safety clauses in the lease and offering no relocation assistance. It was a brutal, efficient way to clear out a quarter of the building in one fell swoop. We held another meeting, this time in the sad little park down the street. The mood was funereal. "My daughter wants me to move to New Jersey with her," Mrs. Diaz said, her voice thin and frail. She looked smaller than she had a few weeks ago. "But this is my home. My friends are here. My doctor is here." Ben and Chloe were next. "We found a place in Queens," Ben said, his voice flat. "It's a shoebox, and the commute will kill me, but it's all we can afford. We move out Saturday." One by one, my neighbors were being picked off, scattered to the winds by Sterling's calculated greed. Every time another moving truck pulled up to the Althea, it felt like a part of me was being carved out. The community we had, the unspoken network of borrowed cups of sugar and friendly hellos in the hallway, was dissolving. And it was all my fault. That's what the voice in my head kept saying. The fire started in my apartment. I was the one who poked the bear. I hit my lowest point on a Tuesday. I just had a call with Sterling's lawyer, a woman with a voice so cold it could freeze boiling water, who informed me they were denying my claim pending the full investigation. It was a clear intimidation tactic. Broke, exhausted, and smelling faintly of Chihuahua, I was scrolling through my email, deleting junk mail with a kind of grim satisfaction. And then I saw it. An email with the subject line, "Inquiry re, ghost in the system." My heart did a weird little stutter step. Ghost in the System was my baby, my passion project. A short 5-episode animated series I'd made 3 years ago in a fit of creative inspiration. It was about a freshly born, sentient AI named Glitch who escapes its corporate server and tries to understand humanity by navigating the beautiful, chaotic, and utterly terrifying landscape of the internet. It was weird and funny and deeply personal. I'd poured my soul into it, uploaded it to a dusty corner of a portfolio website, and then nothing. It was my brilliant failure, a testament to my artistic ambition and commercial invisibility. My finger hovered over the delete button. It was probably spam. But curiosity, that persistent little weed, made me click. "Dear Miss Vance, my name is David Chen, and I'm a producer in the Animation Development Department at Stellar Motion Studios. I came across your series Ghost in the System via a Junior Creatives portfolio link, and, to be frank, my entire team has become obsessed with it. I stopped reading, my breath caught in my throat. This had to be a prank, a very, very cruel prank. I reread the name, Stellar Motion Studios. They were the big leagues, the dream factory, the people behind Star Sailors and the Mushroom Kingdom, cinematic masterpieces of animation. I kept reading, my heart pounding against my ribs. The character of Glitch is one of the most original concepts we've seen in years. The blend of humor, existential dread, and visual inventiveness is precisely what we're looking for. We believe Ghost in the System has the potential to be a major series. We would like to schedule a call to discuss the possibility of acquiring the property. We are prepared to make a significant offer that would include a multi-season commitment, a creator deal, and an executive producer credit for you. We look forward to hearing from you." I stared at the screen. The words seemed to shimmer, unreal. I stood up and walked to Maya's tiny kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it. I walked back and sat down. The email was still there. It was real. A week later, I was on a video call with David Chen and a team of smiling, enthusiastic studio executives. They talked about character arcs and merchandising potential. They threw out names of famous actors they thought would be perfect to voice Glitch, and then they made their offer. The number they slid into the chat window was so large, so obscene, that I laughed out loud. It wasn't a buy a new computer number. It wasn't a put a down payment on a small apartment number. It was a buy a private island and never speak to another human being again number. It was life-altering, reality-bending, fairy godmother level money. My first thought was freedom. Pure, unadulterated escape. I could sign the papers, take the money, and leave this whole nightmare behind. I could buy a sleek, modern apartment in a brand new building, a place that didn't have ghosts or greedy landlords. I could disappear and let the smoldering ruins of my old life fade into memory. I was so close to saying yes, so incredibly close. I pictured myself on a beach somewhere, sipping something with a tiny umbrella in it. But then, another image pushed its way into my mind. It was Mrs. Diaz's face, crumpled with worry. It was Ben, loading boxes into a U-Haul, his shoulders slumped in defeat. And it was Marcus Sterling's smug, punchable face saying, "This isn't a charity, it's a business." A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Maya, who had been listening from the other side of the room, raised an eyebrow. "Lara, what is it?" "He called it a business," I whispered, a new, audacious, and frankly unhinged idea blooming in my mind. The money wasn't just an escape hatch anymore, it was ammunition. "Okay, Sterling," I said to the empty room. "Let's do business." The first rule of going to war with a real estate tycoon is that you don't do it alone. The second rule is that you hire a lawyer who enjoys this kind of thing a little too much. That's how I found myself in the ludicrously expensive, minimalist office of one Miss Althea Chen. No relation to the building, I checked. It was just a coincidence so perfect, I decided it had to be a good omen. Miss Chen was a legend in New York real estate circles, a shark in a Dior suit who specialized in dismantling predatory developers. She was short, impeccably dressed, and had a gaze so intense it felt like she was x-raying my financial records. I laid out the whole story: Sterling, the rent hike, the fire, my neighbors, and the fat, gleaming pile of animation money that was about to land in my bank account. Miss Chen listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This is an emotional plan, Miss Vance," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment. "Emotional plans have vulnerabilities. You want to save your friends. You want revenge. These are liabilities in a negotiation." "I know," I said, "but I also want his building, and I'm willing to pay for it, and for you." I slid a cashier's check for her retainer across the polished mahogany desk. It was for an amount that made my stomach clench. Miss Chen glanced at it, then back at me. A flicker of something, respect, amusement, passed through her eyes. "Very well," she said, a thin smile touching her lips. "I do so love a hostile takeover. Let's gut him." Miss Chen and her team of junior legal piranhas descended on Sterling Properties with the quiet efficiency of a special ops team. While I was finalizing the deal with Stellar Motion Studios, a process that involved more paperwork than I thought existed in the known universe, Chen's people were digging, and they found gold. "He's a house of cards," Chen told me a week later over the phone. I was sitting in a coffee shop trying to sketch out ideas for Glitch's character design. Sterling over-leveraged himself to acquire a portfolio of rent-controlled buildings. The Althea is just one of them. He used high-interest, short-term loans from some very impatient private equity vultures. He promised them he'd have the buildings empty and gutted for condo conversion within 6 months. "So he's on a deadline," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "He's on a razor's edge," she corrected. "If he doesn't show significant progress soon, his investors will pull out and his whole paper empire will fold. He needs to get you and your neighbors out. And he needs it to happen yesterday." Suddenly, Sterling's cruelty wasn't just casual greed, it was desperation. He wasn't just a villain, he was a cornered animal. And cornered animals make mistakes. The plan was simple, elegant, and brutal. Acting through a shell corporation with a deliberately boring name, Manhattan Property Holdings LLC, Ms. Chen made an anonymous, all-cash offer to buy the Althea. "We're not going to lowball him," she explained. "We're going to offer him a deal that's just good enough to be tempting. We'll offer him a price that covers his entire debt on the building and gives him a small but clean profit. It's his get-out-of-jail-free card, an easy way out of his bad investment." The first response from Sterling's lawyer was dismissive. The second was a ridiculously high counteroffer, a clear attempt to see if he was dealing with a fool. "We hold," Chen said calmly. "We don't respond for 48 hours. Let him sweat." It was the most nerve-wracking 2 days of my life. I paced Maya's apartment, stress-ate an entire bag of cheese puffs, and watched my phone like a hawk. I was about to spend almost every penny of my magical windfall on a decrepit old building out of pure, unadulterated spite. It was either the smartest or the dumbest thing I had ever done. On the third day, they caved. A new, much more reasonable offer came through. Miss Chen countered with our original number, adding only a single sentence: "This offer is final and expires in 24 hours." The next morning, they accepted. Sterling wanted to meet the buyer at the closing. His ego couldn't handle the anonymity. He needed to see the face of the person who was systematically dismantling his grand vision. The closing took place in a sterile conference room on the 40th floor of a midtown skyscraper. The air was thin and smelled of money. Sterling was already there, flanked by his cold-eyed lawyer. He was pacing, looking agitated and annoyed. Then Miss Chen and I walked in. I wish I had a camera to capture the look on Marcus Sterling's face. It was a spectacular, multi-act play of emotions. First, confusion. He looked past me, expecting some other corporate suit to walk in. Then, dawning recognition. His eyes widened, the color draining from his tanned face. Then came the final act. Pure, undiluted fury. His jaw tightened and a muscle twitched in his cheek. "You!" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Me," I said, allowing myself a small, triumphant smile. I sat down at the conference table. "Shall we?" The signing was the most satisfying 10 minutes of my life. I signed my name on document after document, each flourish of the pen feeling like a small victory. Sterling signed his with a jerky, angry motion, practically stabbing the paper. When it was all over, his lawyer slid a small, heavy ring of keys across the table. The keys to the Althea. My keys. As we walked out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt 10 feet tall. "We did it," I said to Miss Chen, grinning like an idiot. "We actually did it." "We did," she said, her expression uncharacteristically serious. She handed me a thick accordion file. "But our work isn't over. My forensic accountants just finished their review of the building's internal records, the ones he was legally obligated to turn over post-sale." I opened the file. It was filled with engineering reports, maintenance logs, and invoices. I didn't understand most of it, but the bright red warning labels Chen's team had slapped on dozens of pages were hard to miss. "What is this?" I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "It's a portrait of catastrophic neglect," Chen said bluntly. Sterling wasn't just failing to do upkeep, he was actively hiding major problems. The plumbing is a disaster waiting to happen. The boiler is 30 years past its life expectancy, and the electrical grid— She tapped a particularly alarming report. "It's not just outdated, it's a fire hazard. The inspector he paid off to sign off on it should be in jail." My triumphant grin evaporated. The victory suddenly felt hollow, replaced by a cold, terrifying weight. Sterling was planning to gut the whole building, so he didn't care about its bones. He had passed the problem on to me, and I hadn't just bought a building. I'd bought a beautiful, charming, money-devouring trap that could bankrupt me before the year was out. The weight of that file felt like it was physically pressing down on me for the next 2 days. I was the proud owner of a potential death trap. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I had wanted revenge on Sterling, and I'd gotten it. But in his final act of spite, he had handed me a grenade with the pin pulled. I could have backed out. Miss Chen said we could sue him for fraudulent disclosure, tie him up in court for years, but that would mean putting the building into receivership. An army of court-appointed suits would take over, and my neighbors would be right back where they started, facing eviction. There was only one path forward. It was reckless, terrifying, and financially insane. It was perfect. I called one last tenants meeting. This time, we gathered in the courtyard of the Althea, our courtyard. I'd asked everyone to come, even the families who had already made plans to move. The atmosphere was thick with a kind of exhausted dread. They probably thought I'd bought the building to finish Sterling's job, to flip it myself and make a quick buck. I could see the suspicion in their eyes. I couldn't blame them. I stood on the steps of the back entrance, the ring of keys feeling heavy in my pocket. All my neighbors were there. Mrs. Diaz, looking more fragile than ever. Ben and Chloe holding Leo, their faces a mixture of curiosity and weariness. Jamal, the quiet musician, stood near the back, observing everything as always. "Hi, everyone," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thanks for coming. I know there's been a lot of confusion and uncertainty, so I'll get straight to the point." I took a deep breath. As of 2 days ago, Sterling Properties no longer owns this building. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the small crowd. "My name is Laura Vance," I said, letting the words sink in, "and I own the Althea now." Stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the cracked concrete. People stared at me, then at each other, their faces a canvas of disbelief. Chloe's jaw literally dropped. So, I continued, pushing past their shock. Effective immediately, Sterling is gone. All of his eviction notices are void. Nobody is being forced to leave. A few hesitant gasps. A woman in the back started to cry softly. And one more thing, I said, saving the best for last. I've seen the real maintenance reports. This place needs work, a lot of work. The plumbing, the electrical, it's a mess. So while we fix this place up properly and safely, nobody pays any rent, not for the next 12 months. For a second, there was nothing. Just the sounds of the city. Then, the silence shattered. It was a sound I'll never forget, an explosion of joy, of relief so profound it was almost violent. People were shouting, laughing, crying, hugging each other. It was pure, unadulterated catharsis. Mrs. Diaz pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder. "Mija," she whispered, her voice thick with tears, "you are an angel." I was no angel. I was just a stubborn, angry animator with a fluke of good fortune and a flair for the dramatic. But in that moment, seeing the hope flood back into the faces of my neighbors, I felt something better than vengeful. I felt useful. Our celebration was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming. And there he was, Marcus Sterling, storming into the courtyard like a villain in the third act. He was unhinged, his tailored suit rumpled, his face blotchy with rage. "What is this?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "A party? You think you've won?" He pointed a trembling finger at me. "She has no idea what she's doing. She's a cartoonist. This building is a wreck. She'll run it into the ground and you'll all be out on the street anyway when it collapses on your heads." The crowd quieted, a new seed of doubt planted. They looked from him to me. "He's right," I said calmly. "The building is a mess because you let it rot, Marcus. You took our money and let this place fall apart so you could sell it for scrap." "You can't prove that," he sneered. "Actually," a calm voice said from the back, "I think I can." Jamal, the quiet musician, stepped forward. He held up his phone, his expression serious. "You might want to listen to this, Mr. Sterling." He pressed play. Sterling's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the courtyard. It was clearly a recording of a phone call. "Look, just tell them the fire was a setback, but it helps in the long run," Sterling's recorded voice said. "The faulty wiring on the third floor was a gift. A little spark, the insurance money cleans up the mess, and we get the rats out faster. A win-win." The air went still. He had known. He had known the wiring was a death trap, and he saw the fire not as a tragedy, but as a convenient tool to terrorize his tenants. He hadn't just neglected the building, he'd gambled with our lives. Sterling's face went pale, a sickly, clammy white. That's taken out of context. You can't..." He never got to finish his sentence. Two uniformed police officers, who had been standing discreetly by the alley entrance, stepped forward. I'd taken Miss Chen's advice and called them before the meeting, just in case Sterling decided to show up and cause trouble. I never imagined it would play out this perfectly. "Marcus Sterling," the officer said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're under arrest on suspicion of insurance fraud and reckless endangerment." As they cuffed him, Sterling's eyes met mine. The fury was gone, replaced by a look of utter, pathetic defeat. He hadn't just lost his building, he had lost everything. And his own words had been the final nail in his coffin. The aftermath of Sterling's arrest was a whirlwind. His confession on a hot mic became the linchpin of a massive investigation into his entire real estate empire. It turned out, the Althea wasn't his only dangerously neglected property. My lawyer, Miss Chen, was having the time of her life, fielding calls from other tenant associations and helping the district attorney build a case that would keep Sterling busy for a very long time. Best of all, the insurance money for the fire, which had been held up in red tape, was released. And since I was the new owner, it came directly to me. Sterling's win-win had ironically become the seed money for the Althea's rebirth. You would think that owning a crumbling building and managing a massive renovation would be a nightmare. And it was sometimes. But it was also incredible. The atmosphere in the Althea transformed overnight. The fear and suspicion were gone, replaced by a buzzing, hopeful energy. It wasn't just my building anymore, it was ours. We started having weekly rebuild meetings in the courtyard. I'd print out floor plans and we'd all vote on things. What color to paint the hallways? What kind of flowers to plant in the new window boxes? Mrs. Diaz, who it turned out had a green thumb that could raise the dead, was unanimously elected head of the new garden committee. Ben and Chloe, who had already put a deposit down on the sad little apartment in Queens, canceled their move. Ben, the musician, organized a Rock for the Roof fundraiser concert in the park, and our little neighborhood managed to raise an extra few $1,000s to help with unexpected costs. Jamal, my quiet, observant savior, became the head of our unofficial neighborhood watch. Nothing got past him. My life became a bizarre juggling act. In the morning, I'd be on a Zoom call with Stellar Motion Studios, discussing the comedic timing of a scene where Glitch accidentally downloads the entire contents of Wikipedia and develops a crippling fear of squirrels. An hour later, I'd be in dusty work boots, arguing with a plumbing contractor named Sal about the merits of copper versus PEX piping. I used my animation software to create 3D mock-ups of the renovated lobby and a planned rooftop garden, and I'd present them at our meetings. I was no longer just an animator. I was a landlady, a project manager, a treasurer, and a reluctant leader. And to my own profound surprise, I loved it. My art had always been about creating worlds. Now, I was helping to rebuild a real one. One warm evening, about a year after I bought the building, I was standing on the newly finished rooftop deck. The cheap tar paper was gone, replaced by handsome wooden decking. String lights crisscrossed above, casting a warm glow on clusters of my neighbors, who were laughing and drinking and celebrating our one-year anniversary. Rent was being reinstated the next month, but it was at a fair, reasonable rate that we had all agreed upon in a building-wide vote. The Althea was alive again. The hallways smelled of fresh paint and Mrs. Diaz's arroz con pollo. The new wiring hummed safely in the walls. The plumbing worked. It was more than a building. It was a home, fortified by our collective will to save it. Ben came and stood beside me at the railing, holding a beer. "Crazy, right?" he said, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city. "Completely insane," I agreed. "And, he said, I wrote a song about it, about you. It's kind of cheesy." "Is it called The Landlady Who Slayed the Dragon?" I asked with a smirk. He laughed. "Nah, it's called Foundation." I smiled, a real uncynical smile, the kind I didn't have a year ago. I looked out at the view, the endless sea of lights, the towers scraping the sky. Sterling had been obsessed with this kind of view. He saw it as a commodity, something to be packaged and sold to the highest bidder. He wanted to sell luxury condos with a view, and in the end, that's what I got. Not the condos, thank God, but the view from up here, surrounded by this crazy, loud, beautiful family I had accidentally acquired. It's the most luxurious thing I could ever imagine owning.